Good morning, everyone. This is Ludica Pekina with GAI Insights. Welcome to Daily AI News, where we rate the news essential, important, and optional, helping you get the news very quickly throughout your day. I have John, Adam, Ankash, Paul, and Vivek Makhatia. Correct, Vivek? Welcome, Vivek. He has joined us before. He is a Gen AI medical engagement lead with customers at Pfizer. So he has a very unique perspective on what we usually talk about. We are very happy to have you, Vivek.
Thank you, Luda.
Great. Let's start with the first article, please, Ankash.
Yeah, thanks, Luda. So the first one that we have for today comes from A16Z, and it talks about unbundling the BPO, how AI will disrupt the outsource work.
A thoughtful article about the business process outsourcing, that we have a lot of this in businesses. What do you think about this, Adam?
You know, I usually find A16Z articles to be kind of a way to promote their own companies that they invest in. So I come into the article a little sort of, I guess, hesitant or suspect. And it did a fairly good job of impressing me with what it had to say. So we're talking about the big companies like Accenture, Wipro, TCS, Infosys, these big BPO or outsourcing organizations. And part of the article later on sort of gets into the opportunity for startups that want to try and capture some of that market before the BPOs actually integrate the AI and catch up within their own base. But it provided a really good overview of the landscape and what the opportunity is, how big a market it is. I think it was probably an important read when you consider that there's also an opportunity for organizations to learn from this, not just startups, and look at how they themselves can take back the control of their business processes from the outsourcers. So I considered it an important article.
Vivek, what do you think from like Pfizer point of view? There's lots of outsourcing happening of administrative processes, right?
Yeah, no, I think from a AI leader and what I've seen in the last couple of years working at different companies, that often the processes that to onboard these new vendors are much more challenging than we give credit for. And that's, I think the article does a great job at talking about the ROI. You have to, as a startup, demonstrate significant ROI because the incumbents are pressured by the public markets. But overall, I think this is the trend. This is what industries and companies should go towards, and I am completely in agreement with the article. But the implementation is much more difficult because we're still stuck in the legacy systems quite a bit.
Yeah,
but I think this is a very important article, and I agree with Adam.
I was actually thinking essential. Because it will touch every enterprise throughout every industry. And the current outsourcing schemes are really not perfect, as you mentioned, Vivek. Granted, AI is not perfect either, but it can actually do a good job if trained well. What, John, Paul?
Yeah, I'm actually on the other side. I mean, I think implicit in this is that the BPO customer relationships will be unbundled, that the BPOs won't be able to do this, that the customers are excited about having multiple new vendor relationships and don't value the deep trust relationships with BPOs that know intimately their workflow and data structures here. So I had it as optional.
Yeah, I agree with Paul. Actually, I landed on important for that exact reason, because it doesn't have a strategy on how to move to this new paradigm, but also they don't give any data around has this been successful, right? Very little. There's an opportunity there, but there's not much data in the article.
Okay, John, Adam?
Yeah, I was thinking important. I could be convinced it's optional. I mean, I think the trend is essential, but I think that, as Vivek and Paul both pointed out, the transition to a new supplier is challenging. However, there will be price pressure on the Accentures and the Wipros and so forth of the world, and I think they will rise to that challenge. And so, I don't think it's such an easy substitute. So I could go optional or important.
Okay, I'm going important, guys. Important it is, because at least you have to think about these processes in your strategy and understand how you're going to put it in or out or when.
But I mean, Luda, I think more important, at least another option for the AI leader is that every single BPO contract they have is to create an RFP and put it out there to get pricing pressure on their incumbents. So Accenture, we love your $50 million on here. You guys are not aggressively enough in here. I bid out 15 things here. You guys match it, or we're going to take it off. So I think it gives great pricing leverage for incumbent negotiation.
Yeah, at least, right? But then you can in-source it in some sense, or reduce the amount you're spending on various things. Yeah, so important it is. Let's proceed, Ankash.
Okay, the next one comes from Perplexity. So Perplexity has introduced their own deep research.
Yes, this is interesting. They've been hinting about it, and now it's out. Vivek, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an important announcement. I was between essential and important, but I kind of landed on important because this, after doing a little bit of testing on this model, so as a free subscriber and a freemium model, they give you 5 deep research. It's similar to the Google's deep research or OpenAI's most recently released deep research functionality. This I think it's critical. Again, this is the era of agentic research systems where we're moving towards, and it's this broader shift of knowledge work being outsourced to deep research models. But when I kind of performed the original, just couple early testing, and what I did was I wrote a book chapter on peripheral nerve injuries about 15 years ago, and I wanted to recreate that with this. And all it did was it looked at 15 or 16 different websites and only used 2 sources to generate the report. So it was light on synthesizing the sources, but overall it did a decent job. I also asked it to identify use cases for deep research, right? Asking deep research to do deep research use cases. And it actually just referenced most of OpenAI's work, which was kind of ironic. But I think this is a trend, context-aware learning, multimodal synthesis. I think these are areas that are emerging, and I think that's important for an AI leader to keep an eye on.
Okay, we have an important rating here. What do you guys think? John?
Yeah, I thought, look, you've got a new model from one of the market leaders in this thing, and really someone going deeply after Google. So I thought not essential, but important.
Okay, and Ankash, if you can scroll down to examples where they are comparing what the regular search will do and what the deep research will do, that is actually quite interesting, and they have a number of these examples. Agree, Adam, Paul? Important?
Yeah, look, I think I landed on important as well. They're one of the major competitors. I think when OpenAI came to market, it was more a question of when than if. In some ways, it's keeping up with the Joneses at this point in the world of everyday miracles, that everyone's offering a deep research capability and that you can get it for free. I think it's great for people to be aware of it and take advantage of it.
Okay, yeah, and by the way, the articles that we are reviewing, all the links are on our website, GAI Insights /articles.
Little one point I want to make. I love the fact that you took something that you were a subject matter expert and put it into the reasoning model, because I think that is the best place to thing here. The other thing, I continue to see so many people thinking that these reasoning models are just another natural extension from 3.5 to 4, and not that it's a fundamentally different new category. That we kind of have these, quote, traditional models which are optimized on speed, and now we have a whole new class of models that are optimized on thoroughness and in-depth, what might take 2 to 30 minutes here, and that's what's really going to transform some of your knowledge work here. So That, for many of the other reasons, I like the importance rating.
Okay. All right. Important it is. Let's proceed. Ankash, next article, please.
So the next one is a research paper, and it talks about the new model Hermes 3.
Yes. Coming from Hugging Face and news research, right? If I pronounce it right. John, what did you think about this one?
Sorry, I'm just in an airport lounge here. I was muted. I was going to give this an optional. There's not a lot of detail in this article. It talks about how it uses intuitive models for how to go through chain of thought reasoning. Yeah, I didn't think it really brought a lot more to the party, so I gave it an optional.
Okay, Adam.
Yeah, I agree. Their big claim is about unifying the reasoning models and the normal LLM responses, which is sort of what we'll see OpenAI is looking to do by GPT-5 as well, which is sort of the convergence into one model that can do both. This is at a much smaller scale. I think it's 8 billion parameter. But it's interesting, a little too much towards the research end of things, and certainly not something I see anyone implementing in an enterprise at this point. So I felt it was optional as well.
Vivek, agree, optional?
Yeah, I agree. They don't talk a little much about the time it takes or how it compares to a benchmark against other small models. It's still optional for me.
Okay, optional it is. Let's proceed, Ankash, please.
Hey, the next one comes from OpenAI, and it talks about reasoning best practices.
Yeah, actually compares all the models, when to use them, how to use them. Adam, what do you think?
And I was considering giving this an important rating, and then listening to Paul talk just before about how important this is, frankly, essential it is for the AI leader to understand what this article does such a phenomenal job of breaking down, that I'm going to say this is an essential read. It gets right into the difference between a model like an O1 or an O3, which they call the reasoning models, and the GPT-4o, which they call a GPT model. And this is exactly what we were just talking about with news research. It's exactly what we were talking about earlier with what Perplexity is doing. And they do a phenomenal job of not just explaining the differences between them, but dissecting when to use which. And even there's the little agent framework there where they gave a really beautiful example of an agentic network and when you would use a reasoning model, when you would want to go for the speed and the price factor and use the GPT-4 model. And it just lays it all out really well. I'm going to say it's an essential read.
Okay, Vivek, you're nodding.
Yeah, I agree with Adam. Everything you mentioned. These are now becoming planners and doers. That's how they frame these two sets of separate models. And I love the use cases. I was trying to click through all of them and trying to understand how they're actually implementing this in production, because I'd love to do that for a lot of the use cases I'm working on. So, and it's a great. I think the prompting techniques, it's understated in this article, but how do you engage with these models, and there's some best practices coming directly from OpenAI. It's an essential read.
Yeah, it would have been good if they added the cost element to this article, because by really intelligently sending it to different level of models, you can cut costs significantly. So that is not really mentioned here, but it's a valuable parameter here to consider. So we have essential going. John, Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm okay with essential. This issue of understanding what the query is and what model it should be routed to. As far as I know, all the big model companies are already doing this, even within their GPT models. That they're parsing the query and then routing it, optimizing model routing. I think this is going to be a huge area. It's essential. I think of it as part of the semantic operating system, right? Just when you have a traditional operating system, and Luda, I know you've written some of these, operating systems. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see where the interpretation layer sits. My guess is it'll sit up front, that a query or request, will come in, that will be parsed. It'll then be routed, it'll be checked, it'll be reintegrated, it'll be evaluated, and then it'll be pushed out the back. I think that general architecture we're seeing happen, across a bunch of different things. So yeah, I could see rating this as essential. I also imagine a lot of this advice will get automated. I don't know if we get automated in GPT-5, maybe GPT-6, so people won't have to worry about this for very long before the model will tell you what model you should use.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're thinking that I agree with at the deeper level of switching, right? On the operating system level. This is more on the application level that is also pretty applicable. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Central. Adam, I think you were extremely articulate kicking this thing off here. I think the other thing that's interesting is the idea that using the models to get pricing choice, I think, was naturally going to come. So you put your query in there, ask you some questions, and if Vivek says, are you looking for a $2 answer or a $10 answer here? So I think the whole pricing optimization will have a bunch of engines that price it, but also visual clues that will go back to the user as well. So I think it's very exciting where it's going. That's why it's really, really important for the AI leaders. I mean, I was at a board meeting last week. Was that just last week? Last Wednesday, at a major public and trade border company here. No one at the board level understood what reasoning models were until I demoed it, and they were blown away. So they really got to hear it. This message needs to be said 7 different times in 7 different ways, because I believe it's that important.
Yeah. And Paul, I'll just add, which is interesting and non-obvious, is sometimes it's traditional machine learning versus a large language model. Like one of the projects I was working on, we were looking at how do we extract metadata from PDFs, right? And you could use traditional OCR, or you could send the images to an LLM, and they both had tremendously high accuracy, and it came down to cost.
Yeah.
Right. So there's going to be a lot of ways to solve problems, and the cost is going to become a tremendous factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what's going to be interesting is that when you think about other optimization problems like this, like, manufacturing, for years we've used linear programming and shadow prices and trying to understand what the right configuration is dynamically in real time. I bet we're going to do the same thing here. That we're going to have, new kinds of estimates of cost. Those estimates would put into an optimization engine. That optimization engine will have, prices and trade-offs and latency. It's going to be a mini market in inference inside every large model.
Yeah. Okay. Well, essential it is. Let's proceed, Ankash. Very interesting.
Hey, the next one is a research paper which talks about distillation scaling laws.
Yes. Vivek, as a guest rater and a guest reviewer, you got the difficult article of the day. What did you think about this?
No, 67 pages only. It's a breeze for a robot. But thank you, Luda. No, I think it's in continuation of the discussion we're currently having. Algorithmic innovations to reduce compute cost, and this is an article. I think Apple's trying to play catch up, given that they are behind, and this is Apple researchers putting this research out there. And the research presents sort of understanding of distillation scaling laws, trying to predict the performance of different models, student models from a teacher model, and how do you do this compute efficiently. And this, there are a lot of applications, and this is an important trend because there are a lot of applications where you want to, for all the reasons that you guys all just mentioned right before this, that we want to optimize the cost of deployments of these models, and distillation is just another technique to reduce the burden from a compute perspective, from energy perspective, to have smaller models that perform equally as well. And this is a great article to kind of highlight. And so if you are an AI researcher or ML engineer within a company, or even an AI leader, this is one of the strategies you can implement in your workflows to reduce the cost of compute. So I gave it an important.
Okay. So we have an important rating going. What did you think, Adam?
Yeah, Vivek makes a good case. It felt a little too much on the research side of things for me, and I feel we'll see the results of this in the news before it really becomes relevant to the AI leader. I was on the fence and leaning. Well, I was right on the fence, but considering important for the reasons Vivek mentioned. So Probably still on the fence at this point, but I could support important and make sure, like he said, you can put it in an LLM. You don't have to read the whole thing, or just read the abstract and the conclusion, and you can probably get the value you need out of it.
Okay, John, Paul, important. What do you think?
I was on the fence between optional and important. I can go important.
Okay, Paul?
My vote is for sale. I support the team.
Okay. I'm thinking important for the reasons Vivek mentioned, but also think about the distillation technique as it is, right? So the trade-offs of how much you spend in pre-training models for vertical knowledge, like for healthcare, right? In healthcare and medical, how much you spend on pre-training, post-training, or distilling. Take a regular LLM, pull all the data, and actually put it in a smaller model, right? And get it to be an expert in your domain. I think distillation will become more and more important as a technique, and having that scale of cost and when to use it and how to use it, and projection and what it would give you at which budget, is very important. So I'm certainly voting important.
And Luna, I think implicit in your question is that the AI leaders should be aware of it. So they're asking and probing their AI technical team. Are they using this? Are they looking at this stuff? Is that the...
Correct. That's
Okay.
so
Yeah,
the AI leader needs to be aware that this exists, that that prediction of the cost exists, and when to use it, right? So they should be working with their team to understand when to use it.
Yeah, and so when we use traditional, so one of the findings they had was that when both the teacher and the student models require training for a specific, for example, it's domain specific in healthcare, right? That both a foundation model that is a teacher model will require training, then the supervised learning is more cost efficient. But if the teacher model is already there, then using distillation as a technique to generate a student model is much better, cost-effective option.
Right, and Apple is positioning for on the edge, right? They need deep reasoning on a very small model. So this is a way to predict whether it would fit, whether it would do it. So it's absolutely for people who are on focusing on the edge. This is very important, actually. Okay, let's put it as important and proceed to our last article. Ankash, please.
The last one is a use case from Amazon, and it talks about how benchmark education has accelerated grading and boosting student feedback with GenAI on AWS.
Yeah, this is we've reviewed a similar case, but this is done very well. AWS case, very comprehensive. What did you think about this, John?
Lud, I landed at a different place. I was disappointed by this AWS case. I thought my expectations were high, and I thought it didn't. If I were grading it, I would give it a bad grade. So I was going to make this totally optional. I was very excited about the topic. I think it's incredibly important. As we've talked about before, we think these models are a piece part of a new teaching model that'll be tutoring at scale, that is sensitive to the learners. It's the holy grail of computer-based education. Understanding where the learner is, figuring out what's the best way to communicate with that learner, evaluating them in situ as they go along, leveraging the precious time of teacher attention. This has been the holy grail of computerized learning support since the beginning of computers. And I think large language models can deliver that. I think this particular thing, unfortunately, really doesn't speak to specifically what they did. There's nothing about the data, that tells us, how they did it. It doesn't lay out the organizational and motivation model, which I think is the central challenge, because so few people are autodidacts. Or when I was an academic, we used to say students are the only customers that want less for their money. So it's I think it's a incredibly promising area. Optional article.
I see. So yeah, you're right. They didn't go into the detail of how they did it. They spelled out the results and a lot of why they did it. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay. Anybody disagrees with John?
Well, I'll just add to this. I think what comes to mind is just show don't tell, and a lot of the AWS articles do a really good job of that with their use cases. And this one had tremendous opportunity to use infographics and some other sort of ways to represent what they've accomplished here. And I think it could have been a much more compelling use case that provided a richer understanding of what they're doing, rather than just a whole bunch of paragraphs of text sort of explaining the whys without getting into the details that people have already said. So I was very optional as well, and a bit disappointed because it's tremendously important, and it sounds like they're actually doing some phenomenal things here. They've just done a really poor job of conveying it.
Yeah. Okay. Optional. Vivek, Paul, agree?
Yeah, I agree. I was just gonna. It reminded me of a funny time of my life when I was a work study grader at Boston University, and imagine I had tools like this to help me provide more contextual information to while I was grading. So to John and at this point, this is an incredibly important area.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I was excited about this and the fact that they did it and with good results. But yeah, you're right, thin on the how.
Luda, one thing I just want to know, I thought John's riff on teaching was really, really good. But I think one thing I want to encourage AI leaders to not compartmentalize that to teaching, because I think
Yeah.
just like coding, what's happening in the classroom is going to be equally applicable how you train employees for customer service and entry-level jobs and everything else. So this whole notion of this is Socrates or John called a holy grail of teaching applies to work environments, not just the academic classroom.
Totally.
Yeah,
but
no.
missing the piece of how they did it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the essence of modern management is to move expertise to the point of attack and to manage it for productive value, right? That's the story of scientific management. And so learning teaching is at the core of that. You know, I agree with you, Paul. In corporations, we call it training or evaluation or certification. It's the same thing, right? And if my organization can learn twice as fast as your organization or 2 standard deviations better, as some of the data show, it's not long before I'm going to crush you competitively.
Yeah. Okay. Going optional here. That Ankaj, as you prepare the result sheet, any announcements, Paul, John? Paul, any announcements for
None for me.
the Learning Lab tonight?
Paul's looking for the mute button.
Yeah. So Learning Lab tonight, we do it every Monday, if it come hell or high water or national holidays. Brand Light's a one. They're another company that's really helping brands, so I encourage people to do that. We have people want to stay on after 8 o'clock Eastern. There's a handful of people are excited to watch the Grok announcement tonight. That Grok was trained on Colossus, which I think is 10 to 20 times more powerful as a learning compute infrastructure than what GPT-4 was. And one thesis that people are saying, if scaling laws really are true, the more compute and more gives you more powerful model. We will find out tonight or in the next few days as we use the model here, because that model is either going to be 1,000 times better than ChatGPT-4, which means scaling laws still are in place, or if it's not, perhaps the scaling laws, at least in the current transformer paradigm, are starting to slow.
That's great. And it's the same sign then, right, as the Learning Lab. It's
Right,
just
correct. Yeah. And John, you've got a talk this Thursday at Museum of Science with Boston.
Yes, the Boston Harvard Club,
yeah.
Boston Harvard Business School Association of Boston. We're going to be talking to 2 leading lights in the application of AI in cancer research from Children's Hospital and Dana-Farber. Just going to be amazing, and also what it's going to do to transform healthcare more broadly in terms of being able to improve. Going to hit on 3 big themes: how do you improve the quality of diagnosis, how you can change improve and accelerate the nature of discovery, and the third thing is really around how ambient and passive collection is going to change from episodic intervention to longitudinal management. So it's going to be very interesting.
That sounds really cool. Okay, for today, we have 1 essential, 3 importance, and 2 optionals. Thank you all. And Vivek, thanks for joining. Always great to have you. Thank you all for a great discussion. Thank you, audience, for joining. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Take care, guys. Thank you.